Welcome to the Kent Branch April educational presentation. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Cindy Robichaud and I'm the current chair of the Kent Branch. Before we begin a couple housekeeping things. Our presentations are recorded and they are available to you on our YouTube channel. Your microphones and cameras have been turned off, but we welcome your questions. If you hover your mouse near the bottom of your screen, you will see the bar with the chat icon. If you click on it, the chat box will open up. Click on the little arrow beside the word everyone and choose questions. Here you can type your questions and your messages for us and for the speaker. We have Elizabeth joining us from California tonight, who's going to help us to monitor the questions. So thank you, Elizabeth, for doing that. So let's get started. For anyone joining us for the first time, let me tell you a little bit about Ontario Ancestors. Ontario Ancestors has been preserving and promoting family history for over 50 years. There are 30 branches all across Ontario. And Ontario Ancestors is the largest genealogical society in Canada. And there's much, much more to tell you, but we don't have time. So please go to their website and check it out, and the link is there for you. So we are the Kent branch of the Ontario Genealogical Society, and our main focus is Chatham-Kent research and general family history. We offer mentoring and education and assistance. We hold a monthly DNA study group. We hold monthly educational presentations such as this, and we have a fantastic resource library. Our Family History Resource Library is located on the second floor of the Chatham-Kent Public Library. It is a gem of genealogical resources for Chatham-Kent. We are currently closed, but we're patiently waiting to reopen. We like hearing from you, so you can contact us at the email on the screen. You can also join our branch Facebook group, which has over 600 people who are interested in genealogy and Chatham-Kent history. It's a great place to ask questions and to share some of your own information in family history. We also have a very comprehensive website with lots of resources for both branch members and the public. This is our website homepage. This section is open to anyone. As you can see, we have a master name index that you could search for your ancestors. We have a featured resource section that we try to change out monthly. We post news and upcoming events and new items of interest, such as this month, the McGill County Atlas Index is there. So if you have not visited our website, we encourage you to come and look around. One big event coming in June is the annual Ontario Ancestors Conference. The conference is being held virtually this year, and there are lots of sessions to choose from. It's a great educational opportunity that you can take advantage of right from home. So please visit the website to learn more. Our next event will be our May 14th presentation, where James McNeil will join us and tell us about the cemetery video series he initiated when the pandemic shutdowns happened last year. And then on June 11th, Julie McGurka will join us and she will discuss her research of the history and the people of the little town of Merlin, which is only a few minutes out of Chatham. So now let's get going with tonight's presentation by Bryan Young, the great-great-grandson of Thomas Young. Bryan, a high school teacher in Saskatchewan, yes, he's joining us tonight from Saskatchewan, which is amazing, is working on the family tree project that his grandfather, Bernard Young, left unfinished when he passed away in 1987. Bernard was born in the Chatham-Kent area in 1905 and is the direct descendant of 3 generations of farmers who lived in Croton, Ontario. Both Bernard's grandfather and great-grandfather are buried in Young Cemetery in Croton. Bryan has revisited Bernard's research sporadically over the past few decades, but it was only due to his recent DNA test that any progress has been achieved. While Bernard hoped to establish the United Empire Loyalist status, Bryan's only goal is to preserve their family heritage for future generations. The information passed down within his family left a brick wall. Documents confirmed much of the information, but how could he look farther back, and could DNA help uncover new clues? So let's have Bryan tell us what he has discovered. Bryan, are you ready to give us a little overview of what you have discovered?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I will stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, and then I'll take over sharing once you've done so.
Wonderful.
All right, okay. So screen one, share. Give that a second. Let me know if you can see that.
Yep, you're good to go.
All right, well, first off, yes, it's nice to have everybody joining. I've been born and raised in Saskatchewan, but the connection to Croton, Ontario, and the Chatham region is quite strong. And as mentioned, my great-grandfather Thomas Young is buried in Croton. And I'd like to thank Merv Howes, my cousin, who I connected with through DNA, for introducing me to this group, because otherwise I wouldn't be here tonight. So thanks for him. And I believe also my uncle Ivan Young has joined us from the Paw, Manitoba. And I'd really like to thank him, because my DNA test didn't have so much insight, but he's one generation further back, and his was so much more useful. All right, so I'm going to switch to this website, and I can probably put it in the chat window if I can find the chat window. Maybe I'll do it after. I'm not sure I'm finding it right now. But anyways, okay. So this was all the information that we had, that my grandfather, I can't take credit for this. This is my grandfather's work. But a couple of years ago, prior to DNA tests, I was working on a master's degree, and we had to make a multimedia project. And I thought, well, let's put my grandfather's research up, because it would be nice to have it preserved. There are other people that maybe they don't have the time to research it, or maybe this interest isn't there yet. But of course, it will certainly be just a matter of time before somebody somewhere will be interested. So I built this and got credit for it, which is nice, university credit. But it goes through Thomas Young. You saw, as I was introduced there, you saw the grave site that's in Croton, Ontario. But this, if you could, can you see my mouse moving?
Yes, we can see it moving, Bryan.
Okay, sorry about that, thanks. This is a family Bible that belonged to Thomas Young, and it was passed down to Thomas's son, Elvin Raymond, and then it went to my grandfather, Bernard Young. He got it in about 1965. So there was a lot of information in here, and it had, you'll get the link to this website later. It had information in there as in not only Thomas's children, but his siblings and his parents. And along with the Bible, we got this photo of Thomas Young, and I colorized it using technology. But the interesting thing is that when I first went onto the internet to search the family tree in about 2009, I was able to find documents for all of these people that my grandfather had traced. He didn't have the internet. He had books, and he actually traveled to Ontario and dug around in the cemeteries and different library archives to try to find it out. So this is Thomas, and this is his first wife, Mary Ann Miller. Here's a book, the County of Kent Commemorative Biographical Record, and Thomas is mentioned in there, but of course there's some mistakes, so I've tried to correct things when I could. So we had all of this information, and these links over here, these are the things that I found starting in about 2009. These were available on the internet. The 1861 census, the 1871 census. I've even got the death certificate of Thomas Young in 1922. So I thought those would be great to preserve those, so that like we had a family Bible with names, but it was really inspirational to me to go on and find the government documents with signatures and names and so on. And so, yeah, my grandfather, he had almost all of them. There was very few mistakes that he had made, but using that, I was able to fill it in. And then we hit a brick wall because I just couldn't go any further. My father was James Young. Well, there's the cemetery, Croton. We've seen that already. Thomas's father was James Young, but there weren't really any documents for James Young. All of the siblings here, as much information as you want. And he had a lot of siblings, so all of these people lived lives and had all kinds of experiences in Croton, Ontario and surrounding areas. But James Young was the brick wall. We know that, according to the family Bible and documents support this, the Kent Biographical Record book supports that he was born 1799, 1873, married a Johnson who was from New Jersey. But how else are we going to find out information? So I guess we can move on to my next, out of the website and to the PowerPoint. So how do I get past this brick wall? Because all we know is that, oh, there's the link. I'll have to paste it in the chat window, but I'm not sure how to find the chat window right now when I'm presenting. Oh, I know how. Oh, it's okay. I'll just keep talking. All right, so
Brian, we can take care of that too.
Okay, thank you. So the only thing that we knew about James Young is we had some pretty general and some vague info. Like I knew all of Thomas's siblings, but I didn't know any of James' siblings. He had, in his family Bible, he didn't choose to write anything about any aunts or uncles. Nothing. I don't know why. I guess maybe everybody had a family Bible at that time. So his was just his immediate family and downward, and nobody thought that those family Bibles would be lost, that they'll always be there. The story that was passed down that we've come across is that James was born in the Three Rivers region of Quebec. That's where he was born, and that he made his way to St. Thomas, Ontario as a young man in his early 20s, and then he moved to Croton after Thomas was born, so in his 30s, and that's where he lived the rest of his life. And I didn't believe that story. I like, what how do you get from either USA or England or Scotland? How do you get to Three Rivers? But by looking at all of those government documents, most of them were agreed that his birthplace was Lower Canada. It would say LC. So, okay, well, that's something to look for. At least we can maybe get past the brick wall, but Quebec's an awful big place and there's lots of Youngs, and years and years of searching for internet records, I just wasn't able to find anything. The other story that we had is that the Youngs came to USA around the time of the Mayflower, and were originally from Scotland. Okay, so we weren't on the Mayflower, but around that time, so that gives you a kind of a general area, and I just didn't see how you'd get from that area to Quebec. But with DNA, at least we can find some clues, and if I can't find his parents, maybe I can find his grandparents. So it's like putting together a puzzle, and this has been a couple of years of work, and it's been hundreds of hours, and I don't think it's going to work for everybody. Like if somebody was adopted and had no clues, this isn't going to work. I have been lucky because, as I said, my uncle Ivan agreed to have his DNA tested. My brother agreed, and so on. So I've got lots of different tests that help me see farther than I would with just my own. All right, so when you first do, and I've used Ancestry. I know there are other sites, But this is what you typically see when you do a DNA test. There's a whole bunch of names, and naively, when I got mine, well, the first thing I did is looked at my ethnic background, and it said Scotland and England, and okay, that makes sense. But you start looking for names. Naively, I just went through my DNA list looking for Youngs. Well, that's not going to help at all, because very few of them have the last name Young. In fact, throughout all of this work, almost all of the cousins that I found aren't Youngs, but you trace back their family tree and you try to find the link. And sometimes that link isn't on a Young either. It's on, like, there's always a grandparent, a grandfather and a grandmother, and sometimes you're linking to the grandmother. So you can't just look for Young. Okay, so the other naive thing that I did when I was starting is I thought, well, let's just do one side at a time. I'm interested in all of mine. I'm interested in my mom's side. I'm interested in my paternal grandmothers, my maternal grandmothers, but let's just do one at a time. So I built a tree that was fairly linear. And there's me, there's my father David, my grandfather Bernard, his father, my great-great-grandfather Thomas, and there's James. And the naive thing about this is that if this is your tree, you will never connect those puzzle pieces together. Everybody will be a link, but you won't know how to connect them. So the first thing I learned is that I made no progress whatsoever for several months until I built my family tree wide. And so this is my father, David Young, kind of in the center. And you can see how wide that is. Like, if I don't know if you can see these gray lines here, this is the size of a screen. So just going through my dad's cousins and siblings and trying to make it as wide as possible, it's already wider than the screen would show. And then I was able to make some connections and start to determine, okay, well, this person in the DNA test matches with this line and so on. But that wasn't still wide enough. It needed to be wider. So this is now my second great grandfather, Thomas Young. And you can see, I don't know if you can see the gray lines there. That's a screen of information. And this is with all of his siblings and working downwards from them too. And you can see it's quite a bit wider. And as soon as I did that, made it really wide, then I was able to take some of the DNA links and I was able to trace them back to, if I go back to that web page, I had all of the siblings there. Where was it? Siblings. Yeah. So I was able to find some DNA matches that descended from Nelson Young. And I've also found some from on the Snary line. And their DNA tests were fairly strong matches, not only for me, but really strong for my Uncle Ivan. So I was able to find several of these siblings, and that really helped because then anybody that shares that match must share some DNA in common. So it's just a matter of linking up the matches. All right, but it takes a lot of time. That's what I've gone through right now has probably been, I don't know, about a year or so of time. And a lot of frustration and just a lot of time of looking at a link, making notes, coming back to it if I need to, so on. Okay, another thing that helped me a lot, and I've already mentioned it, having access to several DNA tests. And so this is me, and here's my father David and my mom Judy. And of course I get 50% DNA, and that's true for anybody. You get exactly half from your dad and exactly half from your mom. So for instance, my brother, when I asked him, would you like to test? Would you like to do a test too, and let me have access to your results? He said, no. What's the point? He said, you've already done one. it won't be that much different. But the thing is, the 50% only works for the first generation up. After that, it's completely random. So I'm just going to make these numbers up. This is just for sake of argument, all right? So the next line up on the Young, this is Bernard Young and his wife, Sylvia Moses. I don't know, but as long as it adds up to 50, it could be randomly anything. I mean, there's a range, a range of averages where you'd get. But let's, for the sake of argument, I put myself as 22% Young, 28% Moses. And on my mom's side, I've got 31 and 19, just to exaggerate it. I'm not saying it would be like that. So my brother might have different numbers. So there's, I don't know if you can see how those change. There's me, Brian, and there's my brother, Rick. And I just made these numbers up. They're not annoying. But the argument is that, yeah, he should do a DNA test if he's willing. And of course, you have to respect privacy. If people aren't willing to do it, then don't, you know, it's not something to have a family scuffle about. But it's amazing because I finally talked him into it. And when I look at my matches and his matches, there are some people that don't show up at all for me, but show up for him. And I know we're full siblings. We have matches on all 4 of these lines. We share common matches on all 4 of them. Most of the matches that I have, he has, but not all of them. And some of the matches that he has, I don't have. So it's interesting. And if you have the luxury of having family members that are willing and are still alive, it really helps to have those extra tests. So unfortunately, my father has passed, and so I can't ask him. Can't ask him for a test. But my mother, she actually did her test before me, and that was helpful because I could then filter out which ones were on her side and which ones were on my dad's side. And she's currently working on her tree, and at some point hopefully when I solve some mysteries, I'll be able to go and work on that as well. But I really wish my father was here, not just for the DNA test. I mean, we miss him a lot. April 18th is coming up, and that's his death anniversary, and we'll spend some family time together as best we can through COVID. But I'm sure that he would be willing to do a DNA test too if he were here. But he does have 2 brothers, and so I have my uncle Ivan who has agreed to do a test and was very, very helpful. I've had that for about a year now, I think. And my other uncle, my dad's oldest brother, Raymond, he has also agreed, but I don't have the results yet. It's been delayed because of COVID. So when I get his results, the nice thing about going a generation up is, like, whatever DNA I have from this line, it's only 50% of my DNA because I also have half of my mom's, right? So my uncle Ivan and DNA confirms, like, he has Young matches, Bigham matches, Moses matches, Bennett matches. So I know we're biologically full uncle, full nephew. But he's got double the amount of DNA that I have. All the matches that I have, he doesn't have all of them because my dad, has slightly different DNA, but he has most of them, and he's got stronger, but he's also got a whole bunch that I don't have. I can't wait to get my Uncle Raymond's DNA test too as well. All right, so that's where I said my journey is not going to be the same as everybody's, because there's some of you won't have that luxury. You won't have anybody that is the next generation up that you can go to and say, would you be willing to do this test? I'm in my early 50s, and I have that. I have quite a few relatives that are still around, and it's very helpful, and I'm very appreciative. All right, so from this point on, I'm going to just reference Uncle Ivan's DNA test then, because the matches are just so much stronger. And I just started going, and this took hundreds of hours, just started going through and trying to track down what which match went with which branch. And you don't have to use this system. This is like 2 generations back, 3 generations back, 4 generations back. I found it helpful, but the problem is these colors, you're only allowed 24 of them, and so you can run out pretty quickly. But this bright red one here, 6 generations back, I believe that is the grandfather of James Young. I've got 276 matches that fit there. I might be wrong. I have to not get emotionally attached to that name, because if the evidence leads elsewhere, I have to be ready to go where the evidence is leading. But I think I'm ready to use DNA to make a compelling argument, and it gets more compelling every day because I keep finding more matches. I'm going to try my best to make a compelling argument that this could be the grandfather of James Young, which is not what I expected at all. When I started this, I thought I'm going to find his dad. I'll find James Young, I'll find a birth certificate somewhere in Quebec, if I'm lucky, or maybe somewhere in Massachusetts. And after I find his dad, then I'll have to, hopefully, doors will open and I'll find James's grandfather and his great-grandfather. But I didn't expect that DNA might allow me to jump right over. The dad is still a mystery. I've got, Merv and I have been working on it. We've got about 4 different candidates, two strong candidates, 2 other maybes. But it happened backwards because I believe we found the grandfather first, or it could be the great-grandfather. Maybe I've skipped 2 generations. So that's the argument I'm going to make, is that this John Virgil Young, who lived in New Hampshire, would be the grandfather. And it's interesting, New Hampshire didn't register for me at all. In fact, when I was going through matches and I was ending up at New Hampshire, I'm like, okay, something's wrong here. That's a red flag. Something's wrong. And I actually dismissed several matches at first, and it kept coming back. I thought people had made mistakes. And then I looked at a map, and New Hampshire is straight south of Quebec. I didn't know that. I'm Saskatchewan, everything's flat and everything's far, but it's not that far to go from Lisbon, New Hampshire, straight north and end up at just in the eastern townships of Quebec. That would kind of make sense. And if James Young was born in 1799, what was happening around that time that would lead his parents to leave the United States around 1790 or so and go north? There could be several things, like perhaps the American Revolution. Perhaps they were United Empire Loyalists. I believe that there were also land grants that were given at that time. People could come up and apply and get land grants. And then if you keep going till about 1812, there was the War of 1812. That might be another reason for people to go. So there's a lot of reasons why Quebec could make sense. All right, so as I said, I started going with, like, I would find somebody who descends from a sibling of Thomas. And then once I look at that, I would look at all the shared matches and I would flag them all the same color. And keep going and keep going and keep going until you finally find someone that you can make a tree for. So if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see all those red dots. They all cluster together. There's some shared link, some shared ancestor that goes back that's not on the Bigham side, or not on the Moses side, or not on the Bennett side. This is on the Young side. What I was doing is I would build a tree around them. And as soon as I built a tree around them, this symbol, you can see it shows up over here. When you build, you add the person in your tree, and you can link them with this symbol right here. So this is a DNA match with my uncle, and this gentleman, 52 centimorgans across 2 segments. That's fairly large. And so I built a tree around them, found a link to one of those Youngs that was living in the eastern townships of Quebec, and matched them up. And I think for those of you that use Ancestry, the through lines, this really powers your through lines when you can build a tree around someone and link it. So I actually will just bring up another web page here. Where am I here? Is it here? Yes, right here. So you can see this is actually the web page for my Uncle Ivan's DNA matches. And you can see not only have I got the colors over here, all different colors, and I've done hundreds of these. If I scroll, you can see colors for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. But if I go up to the top again, and you look on the left-hand side, look for that little blue icon. Every time you see a blue icon, that means they're in the tree. So my tree is impossibly wide. All right, this one is a descendant of a sibling of Thomas Young, 134 centimorgans. So if I click on him and get his shared matches, he will lead me to New Hampshire eventually. So all of these blue, this is hundreds of hours of work. Here's another one that's a descendant of a sibling of Thomas Young, and I've built a tree around him and I've linked him as well, and that'll power the through lines, which will help me find the next one. So sometimes they don't have a tree and I can't do it, and I don't trust their tree either. I find a lot of people have mistakes in their trees, so I always build it myself and I check it myself. Oh, there's Merv House linked. So all of these little blue things, those helped me a lot. I really started making progress when I did that. So I don't know, I've got, I wouldn't even know, several hundreds that I've done. Okay, let me get back to my PowerPoint. So as I said, I don't trust people's trees. This one that I found, this gentleman that is 52 centimorgans, this is his tree. That's it. He's still alive, so it shows up as private. He's got his father and his mother, and they both, this must be a very elderly man. Maybe he's passed. I don't know him. But see, these people were both born prior to 1900. So I'm going to guess this guy was born in the 20s. But that's all of the tree he has. So I have to do my own research on this person, knowing that he's a high link, knowing that he's shared, his shared matches put him in the Young family group. And I build my own tree and I work my way back. And it always, in that shared match, it always ends up back in New Hampshire again and again and again. It doesn't always end up at a Young. This one's a Young, this one, sorry, didn't end up in New Hampshire. It ends up in the eastern townships or it ends up in New Hampshire. Those are the two places. Doesn't always end up at a Young though. And you can see that I haven't followed this line. I typically follow all the lines. Now, some of them end up in Germany, so I can stop following that one. Some of them end up in Ireland right away. I can stop following. Some of them have an unknown mother, and then I can't follow it. So sometimes I have no choice but to stop. But I do all of them first to make sure that I'm actually tracking the DNA link that I think I'm tracking. Because if I think it's this Young and I don't check up here and there's another Young, then I haven't really convinced anybody. I've fooled myself. So this one does end up with a Young, Charles Young, in the eastern townships. So that's a lot of work, because if we look at some mathematics here, oh, this is for Uncle Ivan, sorry. He has 2 parents, that's 2 to the power of 1. But if you go back to his grandparents, he's got 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on. If I go through Uncle Ivan's DNA test and I build trees, and as I said, I'm going on all the branches to make sure I don't mess one up, I could conceivably be looking at 512 grandparents, making sure that, no, that's not a match, that's not a match. And this takes me back to the early 1600s. And anything beyond that, DNA can still match you, but it's usually quite small. and there's a good chance there won't be any match, but it can still happen. So 512 grandparents, that's a lot of work. All of those little blue symbols that I showed you, sometimes I looked at 512 grandparents and found one link after all of those. And at first I didn't even find the links. I just found patterns. I kept ending up in New Hampshire. There's either no pattern at all, or all of a sudden, okay, now I'm back in New Hampshire again. What am I doing in New Hampshire? So that takes a lot of time. And the other interesting thing is I didn't know at first, being a Saskatchewan person where everything is flat, and I was more of a math person. I didn't pay attention to geography. I didn't know there was two Haverhills. As I said, everything keeps going back to New Hampshire. It typically went back to Haverhill, New Hampshire, but occasionally there was a Haverhill, Massachusetts. And I thought, oh, it's the same place. They just changed the name, maybe. But it's not the same place. There are two different Haverhills, and they're quite far apart. It's 126 miles apart. But John Virgil Young, the one I think is the grandfather or great-grandfather of my ancestor, James Young, he was born in Haverhill, Massachusetts, but he moved to Haverhill, New Hampshire at some point in his lifetime. So when I stopped looking so much for names and started looking for patterns for places and stuff, I would always come up with those places. It either goes to, as I said, the Eastern Townships and then the brick wall, or it goes to New Hampshire and or Massachusetts, but it's always Haverhill. And it was confusing for me that there were two towns the same. And that goes right back to the Mayflower, this Haverhill, Massachusetts. So that's starting to fit in too. All of the stuff that I didn't really think was true, that was passed down, kind of is turning out to be true. Okay, so I have to be ready to follow the evidence. So this is John Virgil Young, and he was married to Susanna Getchell. And this is not all their children, but these are all of the ones that survived to adulthood and had children. And when his wife died, he remarried Theodora Wheelock, and they had one. So what I need to do to establish, if I'm going to convince myself that this might be a grandfather, I don't know if it's a grandfather of James or a great-grandfather or a great-great, can't be too many because he's born in like 1727 or something. He could be a grandfather or a great-grandfather. He definitely isn't a dad. He's too old to be the father of James. Then I need to start finding DNA links through all of these children. And so all of those little blue icons that I showed you, when I'm building a tree around somebody, and if I can link it up, then I put a little blue link on it. That's what I did. Again and again, sometimes tracing through up to 500 grandparents, and a lot of dead ends that didn't lead anywhere, but occasionally you get a hit. So the biggest one that I found was this lady named Judy. She was Hills before she was Hart on her in her birthday, Judy Hart, and she's a descendant of Samuel Young, who is a son of John Virgil Young, and that's 26 centimorgans. So that's pretty interesting to see that we've got a link happening. And then I keep looking, and I'm just going to list one for each. All right, I've got like probably 8 or 10 on each of these siblings. Then I was able to find one for another son of John Virgil Young. It's Jesse Young, and that link is with a person named Mary Cuthbertson, and it's a 20 centimorgan link. So that's fairly strong, considering that's quite a ways back. And interesting, the Samuel Young and Jesse Young, they were one of the people that, if you Google Lisbon, New Hampshire, they were one of the two founders of that town. quite famous in that town's history. Lisbon, New Hampshire, just a short distance from Haverhill, New Hampshire. All right, so keep going, and then there's John Jr., and I've got my Uncle Ivan has a DNA match with a person named S. Foster, 20 centimorgans. So I'm starting to fill in the siblings. And here's a younger son, Joseph Young, and I've got, Uncle Ivan has got a DNA match with a person named Wes McDonough, 17 centimorgans. Keep going, here's a link with Joshua Young, a person named Carly Reynolds, 16 centimorgans. Linda Foster, 15 centimorgans, a match with Caleb Young. And again, like I'm just showing you one, I've got probably 8 or 10 each, 8 or 10 that go to Samuel, 8 or 10 that go to Jesse. Here's Caleb now. Oh no, Trifina. Trifina Young, somebody named L. Van Galder, 11 centimorgans. Oh, I just added Benjamin Young, a person named Darlene Danner, 7 centimorgans. And every one of these people, I built the tree and I determined that there was no other link that I could find. And they are shared matches. Not everyone is shared with each other, but you can jump from one to the other just by following shared matches. You will eventually make your way through. And then Lucy Young, the youngest daughter, a match with a person named Kristen Emmert, 7 centimorgans. So those are kind of small, the 7 centimorgans. But as again, it's kind of random. Like, and there's that far back, there's a good chance there won't be any match. Now that 7 centimorgan thing, it can actually, because it's random, that can actually persist for several generations. The larger ones, like it'll cut in half each generation, right? For the first 5 or 6 generations. After that, as I said, it's completely random. It's a roll of the dice. Sometimes you'll end up with a 7 or 8 centimorgan match that it will persist over several generations. Okay, well, I think that's all I got so far. But again, I've got several of them. I still haven't, I thought I had some for Ruth Young, but I couldn't find them for the presentation. I don't have any for Polly Young. I really wish I did, because that's with a different mother. It would be really nice to find a descendant from Polly and match up. So I'm 99.9% convinced that John Virgil is the grandparent, but this would really help. And it'd be nice to find some others as well here. And like Joseph, for instance, I've got at least a dozen that match from him. And Trifina, I've got about 8 or 10. It depends how many people did DNA tests, right? I may never find somebody for Betsy Young unless you know, if nobody has done a DNA test. Okay, so, but that's only half of the story, right? Because if John Virgil is the grandfather, then Susanna Getchell has to be the grandmother. If she's only a great aunt, then James won't carry any of her DNA. So I have to also check her siblings and so on. Now, there were 5 in her family, but 3 of them died young. So there's only 2 of them that made it to adulthood and had children. So Susanna, all of those people that I had named before, they're theoretically DNA matches for Susanna. But what about her brother Zebulon? Would I have any, would I be able to find any DNA matches for Zebulon? Because that's going to make the argument even more compelling if I can find matches that can trace back to them. And yeah, I've got lots of them. So here is a person named Cynthia Page, 14 centimorgans, goes to Zebulon without ever going near the Young family. You can go through, with Cynthia Page, you can go through all branches of her tree back to the 1600s, nowhere near a Young or a relative of a Young, with the exception of Zebulon Getchell, who was the brother of John Virgil Young's wife. And in my opinion, that makes a pretty good argument. But because there's only the 2 siblings, I really need to go a little bit further. So above her parents, Nathaniel Getchell and Susanna Ladd, I need to go up to the next generation up and also try to find DNA matches among her grandparents and her aunts and uncles. One thing that makes it difficult is one of the candidates for James's father was married to somebody who's connected to the lads, so it makes it hard to find out, am I matching the lad married to Nathaniel Getchell, or am I matching the lad that is potentially James's mother? Okay, so, and that brings me up to a word of caution. This isn't going to prove anything. It's just going to suggest. And the more matches I find, like instead of 8 or 10 of each, if I can find 20 or 25 on each sibling, not just the Youngs, but also the Getchells, the argument gets increasingly more compelling and convincing. But I don't know James's mother. For all I know, James Young is the wrong Young. Maybe he's German, but maybe he married a Young that came from New Hampshire, right? I don't know. Or what if James Young is from New Hampshire, but he also married a Getchell? Or what if he married a lad? Then I don't know if I'm tracking the DNA that I think I'm tracking. I need to find that out. And until I find that out, nobody can ever say this 100% proves it. I said 99.9. I can even put another 9 on it, but I don't think that that it's completely convinced yet. The other thing, geographic proximity, that could lead to intermarriages. So if I go back to Zebulon, he had 2 sons and 2 daughters. And this link here is through one of the daughters. But his other daughter married a Young. So I can't follow hers up. I've got lots of matches through that daughter that married a Young, but that doesn't tell me anything because I don't know if I'm tracking the Getchell DNA or the Young DNA. So intermarriages make things complicated, and that's with the lads. There are several places where the lads have intermarried with the Youngs. So that makes it a little bit complicated too. And by geographic proximity, if they stayed in the same place for 150 years, you're going to find instances where, not where, where they're very closely related, but maybe a third cousin marries, or one family connects with another that had previously married before. So, well, that's kind of what I had. It's 5:48, so I hope that's a good time to kind of wrap my end up and see if there are any questions. And there are some links.
Yes, Brian, there's a question from Linda. Do you share the trees you build with the matches that you find? If you make a connection, have you found additional personal information that they may have, i.e. family Bible notation?
Great question. Yes, unfortunately, when I message people in Ancestry, I use Ancestry, there are other ones available. When I message people in Ancestry, it's maybe a 5% response rate. So all of those people that I've got blue things in, I've messaged each and every one of them. And the people that do message me back, I'm always hoping that somebody somewhere has got something. Almost, if the people that, like Thomas's siblings and so on, the people that go that far, they have lots of information and I've got lots of good stuff. But anybody further back, no. So far it has always been that as little as I know, I still know more than them. When I contact somebody, they're like, wow, no, we had no idea. Thanks for telling us. And it's like, I'm happy, but I'm also like, oh, I was really hoping you had a family Bible. One thing that I've also done is I've created a Facebook group for anybody that is a descendant of these Youngs of New Hampshire. And I've got, I think we're up to about 79 members. So not only do I message them, but then I say, if you're on Facebook, would you join this group? And we try to share old pictures, but at the very least, when it's their birthday, I say let's visit, let's give our cousin some birthday greetings. And I don't know, trying to make connections, because these are, if you go back 200 years ago, they were connected, right? They would, but you know, over the last 8 generations, we've lost that connection. And I think it would be quite interesting for, if there was a time machine, for somebody from that era to come back and say, wow, how are you connected to those people? You're so distant. But anyways, yes, thanks for the question, Linda. Did I answer your question? Is that adequate?
Yes, that's helpful. Another question for you, Bryan. Have you transferred your DNA data to other testing companies? And if so, which one have you had the most success with?
Yes, I have, with the GED match. I don't know, is it JED match? I don't know how to say it. That one's got a steep learning curve. And as I said, like I've spent hundreds of hours of doing this, and I've kind of gotten good. I'm kind of a one-trick pony. And so like Merv House is helping me. He's got all kinds of skills that I don't have. I've gotten really good at one thing, and I haven't taken the time to learn JED match, whatever. I know it's got a lot of helpful tools that Ancestry doesn't. And at some point I want to, but I haven't exhausted this yet. I've also uploaded to MyHeritage, but there's a lot of Europeans there, and my mother has some German ancestry, and so I'm finding they're all on my mom's side there. The interesting thing that I did over and above this, I did a Y-DNA test through Family Tree DNA out of Texas. The Y-DNA, it only goes from father to son, father to son, father to son, and it persists for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So the Y-DNA, as long as my father was a young, there was genetically a young, and my grandfather was a young, and Thomas was a young, and so on. Then when I get the results, all of those people should be youngs, and it should lead back to an area. And yeah, they were youngs, and it led back to Scotland. So that matches up with what we were told to do. So interesting, but the Y-DNA test is really expensive, and it hasn't given me any clues as to the mystery around James, but it does certainly help us understand that that we did come from Scotland. Interestingly, there's a family of Youngs in South Carolina that arrived in USA in the 1800s, straight from Scotland, straight to South Carolina, living there, and their match is through the Y-DNA that wouldn't show up. So that would be whoever left Scotland in the 1500s or 1600s and came to USA and started this New Hampshire branch. A cousin stayed behind in Scotland and generation after generation until they finally went to South Carolina.
Thank you, Bryan. That led right into what Sue had asked about the male DNA testing. Another question for you would be for the line of Youngs that settled in Croydon. Are there many descendants still in Kent County?
All of the Youngs are since gone. There are lots of cousins that I have found that that are still there, but they're typically on the Snarey line, or there's some others on, I forget which line right now. There are lots, and it's amazing because if I were to have gone to I want to go sometime. The cemetery at Croton, it needs some work. The last time it had some work done was in the 70s. It needs some work. I'd like to go and do some cleanup and so on. And if I had gone before the DNA test, I wouldn't know one person to visit. But now there's like, well, there's lots of people, and they are cousins. They're distant cousins, but we are related.
Sue had a follow-up. If you do only 37 to 67 markers, and there are other young lines through John, you will know that, and that's not near as expensive as Big Y or more markers.
Yeah, I didn't do the Big Y, but I did the one below it. What is it, 100 and some? But yeah, I just thought if I'm going to do the Y-DNA test, I might as well do the I went second from the top, so mine is bigger than 37 or 67 or whatever. I could probably bring it up here, but I don't know if there's going to be time. I think we're running out of time, right?
We have a few minutes if you are able to grab it.
Sure, let me just see. Okay. My internet will be a little bit slow. So Family Tree DNA is a company out of Texas. And what is my password? I'm going to have to look up my password. It's in my password vault on my phone.
That's okay.
I usually can do it by memory, but of course now I'm camera shy. So, oh, and I knew it too.
So Brian, you mentioned there are the Youngs in Kent County, but your line moved to Saskatchewan. Is that the only line from the Youngs family that moved that way?
Yes, that is the only one. And in that book that I showed you, the Kent biographical record, they left the one out that moved to Saskatchewan. I guess he had been gone for long enough that whoever wrote the book left him out and only had his sisters. So Thomas had one son and the rest were sisters. And the son farmed for a while, but he married into the Bigham family, and they were legitimate United Empire loyalists. My grandfather could have absolutely joined the UE, United Empire Loyalists Club, through the Bighams. He wanted to do it through the Youngs, but they were legitimate United Empire loyalists. And they moved to Saskatchewan. I don't know if there was a shortage of farmland, but Saskatchewan was offering homesteads, and so he moved in about 1912 and took my grandfather as a young boy there. And that's the only branch that went there. The others, Thomas's sibling Nelson Young farmed, but the other siblings didn't farm. And so then the closest well, they probably worked as farmers, but they didn't own their own farms. So as time went on, and if you're not farming, you need to work, at some means. Detroit was the closest city. You just go across the water and you're in USA, and that's a city. So there's more job opportunities. So most of Thomas's siblings ended up in Michigan. There's so many in Michigan, and they don't even know each other, but I've tracked them all down and trying to add them to this Facebook group. All right, yeah, so here's my Y DNA test. I did the Y111. So that includes the 67 and the 37 and the 25 and the 12. But I didn't do the big Y. And you can see here all of these names. On my 111, I've matched a Tolford Raymond Young, a Jeff Young, a Richard Edward Young, a Robert Young, a Brent Young. Oh, here's a Trowbridge. So he probably, when he did his test, thought he was going to get a whole bunch of Trowbridges, but there's they probably call it NPE, non-parent event. He's actually a Young. So here's our Y-DNA haplogroup, IM223. That'll go back for hundreds and hundreds of years until there's some type of genetic mutation, because it can't change. Like your Y, you don't get Y information from your mom. You only get it from your dad. So when I said 50%, with the exception of Y, you get 100% of your dad's DNA, and it doesn't change. You get a perfect copy, barring mutations. Now, if I do the 67, I get different matches at that level. And there's some different names here. There's a McNeil and an Aiken, but there's again some Youngs. And, oh, there's an Atkinson and a Norrell, mostly Youngs though. And then I've also done because the 111 includes all of them up and above, right? So these are Youngs. Here's a Wheelie though, and a Bayer. Some are different. Earl Russell Young. And then you have to look, like if this icon is lit up, they have a tree. But you have to know, do you trust their tree? And I don't like Family Tree DNA's tree thing, tree software. It's really cumbersome you click and then you wait, and then you click and then you wait. And their search isn't as helpful. So what I do is I try to get information. I try to find like I'll click on somebody that has a tree and I'll try to get just their grandparents, and then I go back to Ancestry and I search them there, and I build a tree around them. And so I was able to find one group that went from Scotland in the 1800s to South Carolina, and we are connected through Y-DNA. It won't show up at all. It's way too far back to show up on Ancestry, but the Y-DNA is a match. Quite interesting.
Okay, well, it sounds like you may have been inspired to pursue your family history through your grandfather. Would you say that he was, your inspiration? And that's very, very fortunate that you had that influence in your life.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, it's he left a briefcase of notes, and it was just kind of fascinating for me that like it's not just names. It can't just be just names. There has to be stories. Like I've tried to give you a little bit of that through this evening. Is like, why is Quebec of interest? Why would those links that go to the eastern townships, they started about 1790 and they ended about 1825. So what was happening in those dates that would be of interest? The War of 1812, those types of things. So it's a matter of I guess it's kind of interesting because my great grandfather Thomas, he wrote the names in the Bible, so he must have been interested in it. And then it skipped a generation, and then my grandfather Bernard, he got the Bible in 1970-ish, 72. I don't know, early six. When did his? Oh, maybe he got it around 1967. I think that's when his father passed. But he started working on it in the early 70s. So it skipped a generation from Thomas to Bernard, and then my dad was busy farming and he passed away early through a car accident. So it skipped a generation to me, and so maybe it's going to skip a generation. Maybe it's going to be, I don't know, not my daughter, but maybe the next generation. I've got some cousins in Regina, Saskatchewan, and they're very active in this Facebook group. So maybe it's going to be them that picks it up next. So that the web page that I started with, it wasn't just text and government documents. I've also got videos on there where I try to tell the story. If family members maybe aren't interested in reading boring old stuff, well, listen to a 5-minute video where I tell you some of the story. Like one of Thomas's siblings married a man from Michigan, and he died in the Civil War. We didn't know that. That was not something that was passed down in the family story. But when you look at the documents, you see that he died in the Civil War, and then you can see that she gets his pension. It's kind of an interesting story. You can imagine her husband going off to war and not coming home, and there she is, widowed. She lived for a while in Ontario, but then she eventually went to Michigan to spend out her days. Another thing that was interesting that I found, Thomas, I said he had one son and the rest were girls. One of his daughters, her husband passed away the day before the other daughter got married. Can you imagine having a wedding when your sister's husband just died the day before? And it's like, we can't cancel it. I guess we go through with the wedding. It must have been a very, very different wedding ceremony when you've just had a death and the very next day you've got a wedding. So it's not just names. Yes, my grandfather inspired me, and I'm trying to capture, history as well. And if I can put it in a video, great. And if somebody comes across it at some point in the future, they don't have to recreate the wheel. They can go further. I went further because my grandfather started, and he went further because Thomas wrote names down. So maybe the person after me can go further, or at very least they don't have to recreate what I've done.
Right. So you are actually continuing on the tradition of passing that genealogical baton. So that's your website is fantastic. So hopefully people will go to it. I agree with you. The videos you did are very engaging. And you say that your grandfather inspired you, but I believe that you are an inspiration to encourage people to do the same and to pay a tribute and to preserve their family history in any form that they can do themselves. But yeah, you did a fantastic job. And like I say, if people have the opportunity, please go to his website and take a look around, because it's a very, very good. So, and then one other point I noticed popped up all the time in your presentation would be to maybe leave everybody with this thought is preservation pays off. Hours and hours and hours. It sounds like it eventually, the little tidbits come through and it does pay off. So
Yeah,
that's a good point too.
Don't give up, just persevere. Yeah, so I put the 2 links, and I'm going to mute now and be quiet. I put the 2 links in the chat box there. And I'll also type my email address in case you have questions. But yeah, if you've got time, please visit. One is the link for the website, and the other one is the PowerPoint that I went through.
Okay, that's great. And we also, yeah, and we also have the website. If anybody needs it, they can always message the branch at kent@ogs.on.ca. So thank you so much, Bryan. That was wonderful. We greatly appreciate you joining us from Saskatchewan. And a reminder of our next May presentation on May the 14th. As I said, James McNeil will explain to us how the initiative for the cemetery video series started when the pandemic shut everything down last year. They were able to enlist a drone, and he went out to a few Chatham-Kent cemeteries, and they did a bit of history and a bit of, you know, some of the interesting folks that were buried in those cemeteries. So he's going to join us and tell us a little bit about that. So thanks again, everyone, for spending your Friday night with us. We truly appreciate it. And have a good week, and hopefully we will see you in May. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.